Good morning. Seeing some familiar names and familiar faces. Professor Ahmad, it looks like you're in an exotic tropical location.
Well, ever since the Zoom started, I'm on a vacation.
Keeps it interesting. President Mason. Hi, Carol. How are you? What an honor. You're muted.
Yeah, I was getting a little worried. I thought maybe they're not going to let me in.
No, we talked it over and we decided you could come. So. Thanks for joining us.
I'm so glad I made the cut.
Oh, good. Professor Adams is here. Hello, Jama. Welcome. I'm glad Do It was able to get you in. We had some minor technical difficulties. What's a Zoom meeting without some technical difficulties, right? But it looks welcome. Thank you for joining us. And thank you all for joining us. I know it's a full day, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm Raymond Patton, as many of you know, the Director of Honors and also faculty in the History Department. And I'm joined here by three members of the Honors Advisory Board, Professor Jama Adams, Professor Lissette Delgado-Cruzata, and Professor Olivera Jokic will be joining us in a little while. She had another commitment at the beginning of the panel, but she'll be coming in a little bit. Thank you so much for attending this discussion. It's a really important one. It's coming out of work that's been going on for a while in honors. For me, it really started the first week for me on the job in the fall of 2019. Just in the first couple of days I was in the office, a student came into my office and told me we need more faculty of color teaching in honors. And different aspects of the program, inclusivity, diversity, and racial justice have not died down at all as conversations among the students, faculty, and staff. The honors program theme is the common good, as many of you know. And of course, John Jay is an institution focused on justice. Many of our students, as you also know, come to John Jay with a sense of injustice that they've experienced in the educational system and have a real interest in making their educational experience at John Jay an equitable one. It's no secret that higher education is traditionally a white Euro-American male-dominated space, yet our students are primarily students of color, primarily women of color. How we can bridge that gap is a conversation that's been going on around the U.S. and around John Jay. Many of you have joined me in that conversation, and it's certainly taking place in honors too. I would suggest that in some ways, in fact, this question, this tension, is even more pronounced in honors because the racial hierarchies in higher education and in wider society makes it so that academic excellence is sometimes mistakenly associated with whiteness. So this is not just a John Jay issue or an honors issue, an issue across all of higher education and beyond, but one that I would suggest is we particularly feel in honors programs. There are some institutions where honors programs are holdouts for white middle-class students in sort of a wider student body of students of color. That is not true at John Jay. And here I'd like to thank the work of my predecessors, Dr. Byrne, of course, and Dr. Lenz, who've done an amazing job of making sure the honors community has the same demographic makeup as the rest of John Jay. But even so, in my conversations with students, it's clear that many of them have internalized this discourse that associates academic excellence with whiteness. And there have been conversations I've had with rooms filled with students of color who all somehow perceive themselves as exceptions, that they're rare representatives of students of color in sort of a sea of whiteness in contrast to the actual makeup of the program. It's actually not that surprising if you think about it, though, because in the context of an unequal society, an unequal higher educational system, it's clear that it's not enough to just be demographically diverse or to just talk about justice and honors. We have to dedicate ourselves to actively deconstructing the structures and discourse that continues to make the academy and honors feel like white-dominated spaces. So I just wanted to provide some of that context to get the conversation started. I'm really interested in chatting with you all today and hearing more from our advisory board about how we can change this narrative, shift some of these structures within John Jay, despite all the challenges going on outside of the college. And really address this question of how to promote academic excellence in a way that also promotes inclusivity and racial justice. What does that actually look like? There is an honors strategic plan covering 5 years for tackling this very question. Just so you all know, it covers 5 different areas: outreach, admissions, culture, curriculum, and instruction. It's these last 2 pieces, curriculum and instruction, that I'd like to really focus on with you all today. It's Faculty Development Day, and the key place for shaping how honors students experience the program, I think, is often what happens in the classroom and what happens in the curriculum, which is, of course, the purview of all of you. Just one project I wanted to bring to your attention before we really start the conversation is this spring semester, there's a group of 12 students of color in honors who will be meeting over the course of the semester to review best practices across higher education and honors programs elsewhere, the program mission of honors at John Jay, our website, our curriculum, all sorts of areas of the programs, and eventually proposing revisions to the honors community, faculty, staff, and advisory board. So that work is taking place. Of course, we also, it's also critical to involve all of you, the faculty, in this conversation, which is what we're going to do now. That's enough from me, though. I'd like to turn it over to my colleagues on the advisory board. Professor Adams, Professor Delgado-Cruzata, which of you would like to start?
I'll make a few comments. I think if we pull back and we look at structure, the way the undergraduate experience is set up, a minimum of 5 courses ideally, assumes that the students are still in an environment, that a larger cultural environment that makes that possible. We know from our outcomes that it's a minority of students who are able to get out in 4 years because they have to work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we know that. One of the challenges you face in the honors program is one of the problems talented and gifted students have been complaining about for generations, is that we think if we give them more work, that's the solution to their problems because they're brighter. So the whole issue of how time is managed is something we need to revisit, because we're dealing with many of these students are first generation to go to college. And yes, coming to college creates a certain dissonance. You know, a 17-year-old is coming into a larger culturally diverse environment. But this dissonance, I think, is made more intense by many of the students being culturally different from the college population. I'm not even so sure that we say that we're used to, because John Jay has been diverse so many times, but the assumptions behind this, that they have the time, that the families want them there for knowledge for the sake of knowledge. So that's something we need to pay attention to. I don't think we have enough information on the homes they're coming from and what those fantasies and expectations are. Many of those homes are very utilitarian in their approach to intellectual development, which then creates another problem for us, because if we're not careful, we're educating students to fit into a capitalist marketplace with which we have profound concerns. Okay, so the whole question of who are we educating them for is something that needs to be looked at much, much more carefully, given where they're coming from, and given that the role of a university is to be part of transforming a society, as against just having students fit into equally racist, sexist classes, graduate programs, or jobs. So I think we need to look at home, and we need to revisit our curricula, and we can talk about that a little later. The last point is, are we creating spaces where students can engage in reverie and reflection, or are we creating spaces where they just have to do more work and more papers, and there's no ability on their part to get beyond the obvious because we've structured it so much so that they can be successful? Let me stop there.
Thank you, Professor Adams. I have lots of thoughts on that, but I'll hold myself back. And Professor Delgado-Cruzata, would you like to share your thoughts?
I mean, when you invited me to join the honors program, which was, I don't know, a month ago or so, maybe two, it kind of started, I mean, I have worked with honors students before, but never actually sat in a classroom with them or taught them. That would be this semester for the first time. But one thing that keeps coming to my head is like, how do we actually, there is not much known, like you said, because of these students feel like kind of an anomaly within their own groups. There is not much that we understand about how to actually support their success in terms of actual data and evidence from our perspective as instructors, from the point of, you know, appropriate approaches or practices. I'm going to go from the assumption that whatever is working for the whole population of students would also work for honors students, right? And we know a shift in the way and we look at teaching and how students learn is actually has been happening, and it really supports students from diverse backgrounds. So that's kind of what I guess I'm putting the way into what we can do as faculty when we are interacting with them, right? And how we can work or in some way, again, to use the same word, shift how we are approaching the teaching. I mean, we also were educated in these male-free, male-dominated and white environments. And that is where our knowledge is coming from. So we have to kind of question that source of knowledge. We have to question our own assumptions. And in a way, we have to build in some flexibility to be able to intake new approaches and then share these with the students. So while, you know, we can think about structural things that we can do and modify, we also have to introspectively kind of do some work in understanding what is it that we are doing that even if we're saying we don't want to perpetuate the status quo, what is it that we're doing that actually does that, even when we're not intentionally, you know, doing so. So that's where I am.
Could you say a little bit more about, so what you said about what we sort of are now learning and what we understand about the way that students learn can help us here? Could you say a little bit more about that, about what we do know about how students learn?
So, I mean, there is a lot of work that is coming out, but like last year and the year before, about what people are calling inclusive and equity-minded education and pedagogy, right? So, and that basically means a shift from just using what we have and what we have been given or the textbooks that are there in some way to not only a different kind of materials that we share with them when we are, but how do we share these materials with the students? So a set of practices including open education or inclusive practices as they're called. Some of them imply active learning in the classroom. That basically means the students are doing more of the building up of the information than the professor is just telling them what they need to know. It also, there has been actually some work, sorry, that's what I spent my winter break on, reading on that. There is also actually some assessment of how faculty can actually shift their focus for, like they call, more fixed-minded to open-minded education and, you know, patterns of teaching. So I think in some way we need to engage on these conversations as faculty. And kind of just be exposed to what is it that is out there, what are the things that are already, there is so little, we know little about how these shifts affect honors students. We know more about how they affect the overall student population. We know it promotes equity, it promotes graduation, we know it promotes retention in areas that they intended to graduate on, so they stay there. They're more likely to stay if, for instance, we deliver the knowledge also considering how it's culturally relevant to them. And the fact that we are a minority serving institution or a Hispanic serving institution also means that we have to look at what is it that we're giving them to read and what are the assignments that we're putting together and how, right? How do they represent who they are or the bodies of knowledge from the places they're coming from as well, right? So, so that requires kind of, you know, time to think, and I think time to also interact with other faculty. Their departments, what are usually called ethnic studies departments, that are known for doing this kind of work all the time, right? So, but that is different from other, you know, other departments where, like mine, where usually it's not something that that people are thinking and integrating into the content. But the reality is that the only way it works is that we all work together, kind of, or we work with other people doing this and making, you know, this kind of shift. Even they have seen that a year training for faculty actually shifts people from more fixed-minded to, you know, on a more open-minded approach. The evidence is there, you know, so it's really something to consider for us as faculty to engage on.
Yeah, these are great points, and it reminds me that in some ways, I think teaching in a way that is inclusive and sort of suffused with racial justice is good teaching. They really kind of work together. One of the things, you're exactly right that the research on this area is relatively new. And John Jay is kind of in this cohort of really just a handful of institutions that are past the point of talking about how do we get students of color into our honors programs. We're actually talking about, all right, now that they're here, how do we serve them? And there are a few collections of research on that I'm going to be getting into with the students. What we do know, though, is from our conversations we've been having all the time with our students and alumni. And what we found is exactly as Professor Adams mentioned, a lot of them are coming from families with intense pressures on what they should be doing in college. And of course, that's not surprising. In some ways, the idea of going into higher education as sort of this place of free intellectual exploration is that's a privilege. That's a luxury that students who are in poverty cannot afford, or at least their families have trouble figuring out how exploration could lead to, could be practical for them and for their families. We're also faced with the challenge of students coming into honors with a strong sense of the expectations of honors being something external being imposed upon them that they have to meet. And in order to do that, they have to sort of suppress their own family experience, family expectations, sometimes their own identities. One of the key places we've found for addressing that and reconciling kind of where a student is from and where we'd like them to go is we've really built out sort of the way that honors engages with students' identities and making that really explicit. We do that in colloquium when they come into the program, talk about, all right, who are you? Where do you come from? What are your talking openly or having students reflect in small groups on what their family's expectations are on them, what their passions are, what their dreams are. And sometimes they see all of these contradictions and different pressures pushing on them. And we actually give them a space for, as they're reading about these sort of broader social forces being pushed on them, for navigating that challenge and really making honors a place that helps them achieve helps them imagine and then achieve their own idea of their goals, excellence, what it means for them, and not as a separate sort of external set of standards that's being imposed on them, while also giving them a space to question some of the narratives that have been pushed on them at home as well. So that has seemed to work really well with students. They're responding well to that. And I think thinking of ways to expand other spots in the curriculum to really grapple with some of these questions about identity, race, how higher education is as you described, Professor Adams, coming into a new and different culture, ways of challenging that, but ways of also learning from that in complex ways.
Ray, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please do.
I'm just curious. So how do the students respond? How do you get them comfortable to have that kind of open discussion, to be that vulnerable?
Yeah, right. That great question. The first year it was a little easier to do in person. One piece of it is to I know a lot of our faculty make an effort to sort of show their own vulnerability with students in front of the classroom, talking about our own experiences, giving a space for students to talk about their own experience and making it clear that that all experiences are valid, sort of setting up a culture. Community agreements are good at this. And actually, this is something that's happening around John Jay. So a lot of students have an understanding of community agreements, showing sort of mutual respect and setting a context where students are encouraged to share their own experiences in ways, as long as it's in ways that don't sort of infringe on the experiences of others. That's one piece. A second piece, and this is especially in the remote environment, as much as I value my time with students, we found that smaller groups often give students a space to really reflect on their own experiences, and also affinity groups. So making sure that we have groups in honors led by peer mentors, groups of 8 to 10 students, and they're organized by area of interest. But we also make sure that students are not going to feel like they're the only person from their own sort of cultural, ethnic, racial background. So we make sure there are clusters of students who have similar backgrounds and can relate to each other. And kind of share ways in which their experiences are similar or perhaps surprisingly different. That has been really, really effective in this group. We've heard from students and peer mentors alike over and over again that is the space where they've felt like they've really been able to explore their identities, talk with each other about sort of the challenges of college, especially in this online environment. The third piece I'll mention is this year we went to sort of a new culminating assignment at the end of the semester in colloquium, which is in the past we had students sort of write text-based personal narratives where they're sort of unpacking who they are, what they're doing, where they want to head in the future. We changed it to a visually based assignment. So students sort of created a collage of their past, their present, and then their goals for the future. And that provided a space where they could really sort of think more openly and flexibly about who they were and where they wanted to go. Julia, yes, that's a great point. And actually, do you want to say that out loud? I want to take a step back here and open it up to many of you have experience teaching honors students and have grappled with some of these issues. And I'd like to take some time to hear your perspectives and insights. Julia, do you want to share what you just wrote in the chat?
Hi. Well, in my experience, we read some pieces with very strong personal opinions and histories, and that was very stimulating for students, mainly in small groups, to discuss similarities and differences with these experiences, because I wouldn't have expected them to be so open to share and discuss their personal experiences like that, but that was a really nice surprise for me.
Yeah,
but they were also very careful like among, like in these small groups, we're not so comfortable in the big group sometimes, but once one student opened the conversation, it was easier for everybody else to also share that.
Yeah, I think creating sort of this environment of trust among the students, also between the students and the faculty member, is key. And there are things that individual instructors can do, but there's sort of this culture that can span across the program if we're all working on that together. And I think this gets back to your point, Lissette, about just good pedagogy. The more we can sort of decenter ourselves as, you know, the wise person at the front of the room, like at the top of the hierarchy, who is dispensing wisdom onto students, I think that's especially important for me, being white and male, and that I just need to remove myself from the center of the room in whatever way I can. And once I do that, it kind of opens up the discussion in the way you're describing. Other observations, experiences, questions that you all would like to explore? Yeah, Aftab, you're muted.
Sorry about that. So, do you invite former graduates to talk about their experience about inclusivity as soon as they leave the campus? Because, you know, injustice is natural in this society. It's not, people don't have to do it consciously. They do it unconsciously. I attended a music school's student concert in which all the songs they sang were original by blacks, and none of the students was black. So I concluded that apparently the school has not done a good job, you know, in hiring a diverse population of students. So do you have this kind of activity of inviting?
Yes. Yeah, we do both with the staff. One of the things that's amazing about honors students is they will share their points of view, many of them, not all of them, some of them hold them more closely, but share them with the staff and with their advisors very openly, even before they graduate. But yes, we brought back alumni to speak with us as a staff, and then also to speak with the wider students in colloquium. So we have a panel of alumni come back and kind of talk with them about their own experiences, and then give them a chance to meet in small groups. We've also just this year started, we've brought alumni onto our admissions committee. So making sure that their views are represented both in recruiting students to the program, and that's also an opportunity to really shape sort of the way we talk about the program. Yeah, hugely important point.
Either last academic year or maybe 2 academic years before, I think it was TLC. They put out some small grants asking faculty to write modules in their specialized area, because, you know, the knowledge base is just exploding. You cannot keep up with everything. So I have the honor of teaching with Lissette a course on race and science this semester. And it was interesting because we wrote that course 3 years ago. And one of the struggles we had was it's a money problem at John Jay, where you don't get a chance for 2 people to teach one course because, you know, we just don't have that kind of financing. So there were some creative ways of doing this. So my first point is it would be helpful if we think about how we bring in knowledge, new knowledge. I know nothing substantial about Dominican American culture. I don't know anything substantive about Ecuadorian American culture, and they're flooding into the college. So what that TLC program did is says, listen, you have an expertise in a particular area. Write us a 4 class module. I did one on Black capitalism. Somebody could do one on, you know, dominant themes in Ecuadorian American experiences. And then you read that and you're like, okay, if I read these 5 articles and I follow this lesson plan, I can do it. I don't have to go there and read the entire history of Ecuador and the United States. So I think those kind of modules can be that kind of approach where we know we can go somewhere and download something would be helpful, as against like, well, Jama, you need to go and do a 2-year course on genetics to be able to understand. That's not going to happen. So these creative ways of keeping faculty informed, it didn't hurt. I think we got, rumor has it, we got $500 to do that. I say rumor because, by the time it turns up in your paycheck, you're like, you didn't realize you got paid. But there are small things we can do that can make a difference. The other point I want to make that we have to be careful of is the tension around identity, in that students come to college maybe unconsciously to explore who they are. And that's good. They want to know how they're gendered, how they're racialized, or their class. But they also want to know about how to take on the larger issues, the kind of things that a 20-year-old wants to change the world. And I think we have to be very careful about how we manage that tension, that we don't keep talking about identity simply as identity. Many of our students at 20 are in no position to make any definitive statements about identity. They want to explore, and it's in doing the larger activities that they get into, oh, I like this. And so we have to be careful, because I've seen where identity becomes, I was molested, I'm Black, I'm poor. And those things are true and they need to be dealt with. But we've got to be careful we don't get trapped in that kind of identity as identity and look at the larger issues. And again, there are people in the college who are doing excellent work on gender studies, and other people, Africana studies, are doing wonderful work in this. But how do we get it out to the larger faculty? And I think what I'm pushing is these modules. Okay, you want to talk about identity? Here are 4 modules on how you deal with it as a start to put into your curriculum. Thanks.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a great model for what honors could and should be. Maybe a good place to start, and I'm hoping that the sort of the experiment with the students for the spring will lead in that direction. Honors 201, I think, is a place where that would be really rich for that to happen. I see Professor Gallegos is here in the meeting, so he's one of the faculty members who teaches 201. And we so 201 is the course that introduces students to sort of the intellectual theme of the program. What is the common good? Interestingly, students have often perceived that course as being sort of one of many courses in higher education that sort of has this white European framework. And I think it's because we haven't done a good enough job of making the sort of the diversity of the course explicit, which is something I think can be fixed relatively easily. What I was saying though is Professor Gallegos brings a really both a unique and incredibly diverse perspective to that course, focusing on sort of non-white, non-European perspectives in that course. We have another faculty member whose experience is in critical theories of gender. So there, in fact, are these sort of counter discourses happening in this course. If we bring these faculty members' expertise together in the way you're describing, Professor Adams, and kind of create an opportunity for them to work together, or modules, or whatever form it takes, that I think something like that might be feasible. Professor Gallegos, since you're here, do you want to say anything about your course and your experience teaching it?
He actually typed something into the chat
okay,
because his connection is not that great. So
Got it. Yeah. So I'm going to read it. My connection is okay. So one of the features I've noticed among honors students who are Black or Latinx is they tend to have more willingness to express themselves about issues regarding politics, denouncing and analyzing systemic injustices directed at them or their communities. Absolutely. This is something I think could be channeled in accordance to Du Bois's idea about the guiding hundredth to foster both leadership skills in students of color, but also listening skills in white students. Awesome. Yes. And that's something I think it would be really beneficial for the rest of our faculty to be able to sit down and have a conversation with you and learn more about what that is and how to go about that. Maybe we can find even just a little bit of funding to sort of create a space to do that kind of development work. That would be great. Yeah, Julia, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I really liked what Jama said about how we deal with identity and how careful we are, because like it was not, in my experience, like the way it was framed in our class, it was that we were looking into how voices are crafted. So what do you want from your history in the way you write about whatever topic you want to talk about is part of something you have to learn to do. So like in small groups, they shared a lot of things that they didn't want to share in writing, for example. So we were looking into some of them were very strong texts where identity was like one of the main topics, like how some race issues were translated into a very angry rhetoric, like and how to create that or how to avoid that if you don't want that to happen in the way you speak about who you are. So this how do I call it, because it feels really easy to me sometimes when these topics are very sensitive for students not to create an environment where they're overexposed, and maybe we don't have the tools to deal with some of these issues, and but we like our topic was text and creating identity in a text and creating your own voice, and that was a very, very good experience. Many students ended up writing about topics that were close to them. And I agree with Sergio as well, that some were very political about it. Students who participate in the college in like using this identity as their tool. So some of them were very aware and some others were not. The student who got into the John Jay Finest was surprised to be writing about her Hispanic heritage as something that she has never thought about in this way. Like there are theories that supported the way she felt, and there were words written by others that she could use to create her own voice. So that balance between how intellectually grasp who you are and make sense of that is part of the work we did in class, not only like sharing experiences.
Yeah, totally. I think in that echoes what Professor Adams was saying about, as you said, about how identity, it's not just about like navel gazing and thinking about your own experience. Really, thinking about your identity is an outward-looking exercise, and look. So speaking of it in terms of your social identity, and in colloquium, as we're thinking about ourselves, we also, it's interspersed with justice topics. So thinking about different experiences with justice, whether it's race, gender, environmental justice, and in thinking about these two things in connection. I would say that I think our courses, colloquium, and then your course, Julio, worked really well together because some of the questions and sort of challenging exchanges students were having in colloquium, they were able to unpack in your course. And in fact, their students reported like really learning from being able to talk with each other in sort of a smaller group in a more sort of directed and specific setting in your class about some of the issues that they're dealing with in colloquium. So I hope we're able to take advantage of that again. President Mason, I see your hand is up. You got muted again somehow.
That's because you won't call me Carol.
Carol, sorry.
So I'm really fascinated by the conversation about identity because I have lunches periodically with different student groups, and one of the things that concerns me is how they get, my words, weighed down in how they've internalized how others see them in this victimization deficit kind of thinking. And so what I'm hoping is that the honors program can give us ways and tools to use across the college to see themselves for their successes, their strengths, and how, and so when Jama was talking about the identity issue, I was thinking of it not in terms of the internal looking, but just how they see themselves and not seeing their power, not seeing their strengths. And how do we across the college figure out how to celebrate their strengths and for them to see it. And I think honors program can be an incubator for how we do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly what I hope. I think what Professor Delgado-Cruzata was saying about mindset and growth mindset is a great way of doing that, of being able to see yourself as like, yeah, I'm amazing. I can do some amazing things. And I have infinite amounts to learn and grow still. And those two things are not contradictory. That clearly takes some work, and it takes sort of a culture of building in honors to get away from, as I said, I think students do come to honors kind of expecting to be told that they're inadequate because that's an experience that they've had in other areas of their life before coming to honors. And so finding a way of engaging them that does not reinforce that narrative, but encourages them to grow, and that encourages them to do their very best work. That's the balance to find. Some of you haven't had a chance to share yet. Anyone who hasn't spoken want to bring up your own experiences, your questions, things that you're grappling with? Yeah, Christy.
Yeah, this came to me as I was listening to Lissette talk about reminding us that you know, we've all come up through this institution and we've all had to sort of negotiate it in different ways. And then Ray, when you were talking about the importance of decentering our voices in some ways, and then I started thinking about issues of equity. And now I'm speaking as an adjunct, like issues of equity. I mean, I have expertise, and I think, and it was hard won, and I had to come up through this same institution, and all kinds of things had to happen, and you know, I had to jump through a lot of hoops that I didn't even know existed until I learned about them in graduate school, and all this other stuff. And that expertise, my own experience, is something that I don't want to center it in the classroom, but I want to make sure that students have access to it and know what my strategies for success were, and what my understanding of the institution is, and what my understanding of equity at that level is, so that, you know, I love the idea of sort of us sharing our expertise and developing these modules, but you know what else I would love? To get paid for it. And that and you know, the kind of labors that I have performed all the way up through graduate school and since then, that because of the very institutional sort of forms we've been discussing have not been recognized, is something the students need to see and know about as well, and understand that it's not that simply sort of training them to get their own voices and understand what it is that they can do to value themselves. I mean, I think that the description, Julia, that you had of the work you were doing with voices, it just like, this is like fantastic work. We also have to remind them that this is a system that does not love them, and did not love a lot of us coming up through it. And you know, how do we, my question is always, you know, I give them strategies and I say, these are the things you can do, but at some point it's going to be really shitty. And like, what do you do with that? Like, how do we sort of encourage them to keep going the way we did, the way I did, for instance, and know that there is something at the other end. And it's something I think about all the time. And I don't want to center myself in the classroom, but I want them to gain something from my own experience as well. So that's sort of a tension that I've been thinking about as we've been talking today.
It comes up all the time in the class, and one of the ways I frame it is, how do you do bounded self-disclosure? Because one of the challenges of being centered is that the students sometimes look up to you as a kind of a semi-god because you're Black or you're a woman, and yet they don't see how they can get to where you got to. So I oftentimes speak about, again, as Kristen is saying, being an undergraduate or graduate student with one, we used to call them tokens in those days, but one fare on my MTA card to get to work, to get paid so that and they look at you in shock as if, well, you were once poor, it's like, yes. But more importantly, I also speak about white people being poor, because if they think we're exalted, they think, well, white people just have it easy. So I think that kind of, how did you get to where you got to, and what were the struggles you have that they have in common with them, makes them realize, oh, they're part of a greater, a distinguished struggle, and that they too can make it. But you've got to be very careful, because the invitation to victimhood and oppression is always there. And you want them to have a realistic sense of, it is not going to be easy. You're going to walk into a room, you're the only Latino in that room. Okay, here are some strategies I used when I was Black and walked into the room and I was the only Black person, only to discover that the white woman sitting down next to me grew up in a trailer park and was just as confused about what was going on in that room. So it's tricky. And I think, again, what Kristen is saying, if we can have places where we can discuss this and, again, develop the strategies, here's what works, here that is what doesn't work, because it's these small steps that are going to make a difference. We're not going to wave a wand and transform honors or John Jay. It's incremental, and that's a good thing. But having the spaces where we can do that, and they're beginning to open up more, would be a good thing.
I wanted to say that, this is why I brought on the issue of training and really work with the faculty, because I think the real change happens beyond just we share who we are and our experiences, because we're not able to grapple with everything that is out there. And while our experiences are extremely valuable, we actually know that even having faculty that represents those things that we have not been able, those things that the students are not used to seeing, right? So faculty of color or women that have succeeded in certain spaces is not enough. The data exists. It's just, it is good, but it's just not enough. So we actually need tools, other tools beyond just, it's a more, I think we are all trained to have that higher level conversation ourselves about how is it that we do it and what is it that the evidence says that we should be doing. We have our biases. There's not something we can actually control. So to work on that, we have to actively and with intention, apply things that we already know. And maybe it's the scientist in me that is just thinking about what is it that you do and to change something actively more than based on the evidence that is out there. Then, we don't need to reinvent it. We can actually add to the body of knowledge that already exists. But there is a body of knowledge that we should all become familiar with in terms of how to teach in these spaces or support students to get to that level. And I just wanted to, kind of bring it full circle there, because we do need funds to do this, right? So we do need money to do it. And we should. I'm completely in agreement with Kristen that we need, resources to do this, and all of our faculty and our adjuncts need to be equally supported, and that's where equity comes from, right? So we are going to talk about equity. We have to think about it in these terms and apply them ourselves within our own groups.
Yes, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And while it's going to be a tricky situation in terms of finances this coming year, I'm sure this work is not exceptionally expensive to show faculty that the time they take to come together and work on these important issues is valued. So that is reflected in my notes. Sergio has put another example here in the chat we're wrapping up, by the way. I'm told we have 5 minutes left. So I'll read what Sergio has to say. And if anybody else has sort of any parting thoughts, particularly, yeah, if you haven't had a chance to share yet, I encourage you to do so. I discussed in one of the honors classes a section of The Wretched of the Earth, and we focused in particular on Fanon's views on violence as an emancipatory tool. Yeah, fascinating. It was really revealing to me that while some white students were initially very reticent to consider violence by opposed people as a political tool of liberation, engaging in conversation with Black students about the activism of Huey Newton made them reconsider their views. Yeah. Yeah, we have so many faculty who are bringing so many great ideas and areas of expertise to the table. I think we have to find a way of bringing us all together with some funding in a way that recognizes how precious all of our time is. Any last thoughts, Jama, Lissette? Any concluding thoughts here?
Ray, I just want to thank you for the way in which you've built on the work of those who went before you to broaden the discussion beyond simply where they were white, there should be no students of color, to really shift the debate to one of, what is the role, how do we deal with these issues? So really appreciate you doing the work that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate your insight and support. You have given me so many ideas to work on. So I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
Lissette, did you have anything you wanted to add? You kind of wrapped it up nicely, but if there's anything else.
Good.
And anyone in the audience have anything you'd like to contribute before we move on to the next session? Okay, well, thank you so much for coming and listening, for contributing to the conversation. I will keep you informed on what happens with this group of students, and also be in touch about whatever form for sort of a faculty development conversation with some modest but necessary funding sometime in the not too distant future. Thank you all for your time, and enjoy the rest of the day and getting ready for classes. Oh my goodness, I can't believe the semester's starting.